every human that has the same name is under the same object, so there's not going to be duplicates. The other thing I might want to do is also pass another prop. So index and details are both props here. Key is a default as a prop that exists in the React components.
I see.
But index and details are ones that I'm creating to pass more data to the inbox item component. And I'm going to also pass in the index, so the key that was there, so the human. So now if I take a look at my inbox item, I can actually tell it to do something intelligent. Perhaps instead of typing all this stuff in, I want it to maybe just say, hey, instead of the last message, I want to give it a name. So who is this person that is in my inbox? I'm going to go this.props.index. And before we get further down, I just want to show you the end result, not the end result, but the current result of this. OK, so if I go back into Webpack, everything is compiled. And if I go into here, you'll notice that my load sample data button is there. OK, if I load the sample data, oh, there's an error. Sample is undefined. Where is this?
There it is, line 14.
Right, it is samples. There we go. React has compiled it. Great. So now if I load sample data, you'll notice that, because I haven't changed the data here, that's OK.
Yeah,
but it is loading the key
of
every single human, right? So this is all, again, through the props. We're passing this through the props right here. So this.props. So let's add a few more things just to make this a little bit better. The first thing that I want to do is I actually want to pull out the latest conversation, the latest message that was in the conversations object of this human. So to do that, I'm actually going to go I'm going to copy some code here just to make things a little bit easier. I'm going to go to the second part. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open this up in another Visual Studio Code version. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy a couple of functions here, just to show you. Actually, I'll copy the whole thing.
One of the nice things about React is that you are just writing JavaScript. So if you've been writing JavaScript and you're comfortable with it, then you just there's one language to know, and there's not even necessarily a whole lot in the way of object model for React. There's a few of these component lifecycle functions to learn, and a couple of things in the framework to learn, but mostly you're just writing JavaScript.
Exactly, you're just writing JavaScript, actually. And that's what I just did here. I just copied some JavaScript functions. This function right here is just a sort by date function that will take a look at two objects and the time that they were in and sort of sort them by what was most recent. And then finally, I have this new message summary function, okay, that will basically go through all of the conversations for that human, sort them by their sort date, and take the last message that was sent by the human. And then it will return this little string here that we'll use to actually put into our TD. So here, instead of having 5 p.m., I'm just going to take the last conversation, create a little summary of who said what, and then finally, for the actual last order, what I'm doing here is I'm taking a look at the orders, sorting them by the sort date, again, this little handy function right here, and taking the status of the last order. All right, so if he put in a new order, well, then obviously it'll say an open order. But if the last order he put in has already been delivered, it'll say delivered. So now if I save this, it'll actually be compiled. And if I go back into my browser and I press load sample data, there's my chat received. So this is the last message that was received. Human said 123 Sesame Street at Montreal, Canada. And then the status was confirmed. And then for Jeremy, the last status of his last order was delivered. So you can see that perhaps Rami's last order was never delivered, but it was confirmed.
Yeah.
So that pretty much wraps up how we're going to pass data through props. So just a quick reminder, we set the state of our app, and then we passed the human's piece of our state through the props to the inbox pane. And then the inbox pane passed an individual human to the inbox item that was then rendering the latest information from that human's conversations and orders.
Okay, so you've got the pattern. We get our state and we build the inbox pane. Next, we're going to be looking at the next big piece of the app, which is the conversations pane. And there's some new concepts to learn in there. So let's go ahead and do that next. Hey everybody, welcome back. Now we're going to be talking about this second pane of our sample application. This sample application, once again, contrived just to relay these concepts in react.js. We looked at the inbox pane and these child messages that we had in the inbox pane. You learned some concepts there. Now we're going to look at the second pane in the project, the conversation pane. Yep. And that's gonna teach us a few things, including some stuff around events and how we handle events in React. You know, you've looked at how data flows down, and events are kind of a little bit the way that data flows up. It's the way the user interactions go back up to the application state. So why don't you roll us in?
Right. So let's get right into it. Let's start by creating our actual conversation pane. So we're going to scroll down. If you're following us with the React MVA repository, we are now starting from the Part-1 folder in the Module 3. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to scroll down right here to the bottom, right before the React DOM render, and actually create the conversation pane. So I'll do that by doing our classical, by now hopefully,
now, Rami,
typing.
You're piling this all into the same file. Whole bunch of components in one file. Is that a best practice, or?
Well, see, it depends on how you actually build applications. So if you're building with ES6, and classes and modules, you actually have the luxury of being able to split everything up into modules and using the requires to actually merge everything together.
Okay.
But you can actually also do that as well, even if you're not using ES6 modules.
Okay.
But it's really up to you. Right now, because we've only got less than 100 lines of code, we're going to put everything in the same file.
Yeah.
But you'll see as we add more and more components. So right now we're adding the conversation pane and the messages that are in the conversation, okay, and the selected conversation. You'll see how we set that up. That's already like 4 components, and it starts to make sense to splitting them up as well. So you'll see that in Module 5. So right now we have our var conversation pane. We did our create class here. Of course, we need a render function. So as you would expect. What we're going to do here is we're going to add a div. Again, this is very similar to our inbox pane. And you'll notice that I'm adding this div that is basically going to add some default styling right away from our app.css. Okay, so if I take a look at that, that conversation pane is going to be in our app CSS right down here. So you'll see that we do have some nice background colors. What we're going to do now is maybe add an h1 tag that says this is the conversation. And here's where things get a little bit more interesting. So we're going to follow the same pattern that we did with the render sort of inbox item function right up here. Okay, we're going to do something very similar here, but in this case for the message in the conversation that is selected. So perhaps we might want to add an h3 that says select a conversation from the inbox. All right, and then here are all the messages. So we're going to do that same pattern that we did with the object keys, but this time we're going to go this.props.conversations. Because conversations is already an array, we can directly go to the map function and say this.render message. All right, so if I close that div tag, that's good right there. Now one thing I'm going to want to do is, of course, add that render message function. So I'm going to do that by going render message function right there. And what I'm going to return is perhaps another component, perhaps one with the message. Okay, and then perhaps I'm going to give it these props, like who is actually who is speaking, who said this message, whether it was the human or the bot. So because I'm mapping this, the function will get the key, the human object right away. So I'm going to pass in the who. Because if I look in my sample data, it's already in there for every single conversation object. The message object does have a who, text, and time. I'm just going to straight pass that directly to the message component. And I'm going to do the same thing with the text right here. And with the key, as the key that I'm going to use, I'm just going to use the time right here. Now, this might be a little problematic because it is taking the milliseconds since the Unix epoch. That's what that getTime function does. So perhaps at some point we might have messages that are too close together, and we'll need to add something else to the key to make it a unique key, because otherwise that will give us problems with React. But for now, this will work. And if I save this, Webpack should actually give me an error saying that, oh, actually, no, it didn't. But we are missing actually the message component. So let's go ahead and add that in. Now this component is going to be really, really simple. Now you'll notice that when we were talking about components that should contain state and others that shouldn't, this is an example of a component that probably should not contain and will not contain state because it's just going to be a really simple component. Yeah. All it's going to do is just going to render a function, and it's just going to return a very simple paragraph tag with this.props.who said, and then here I actually do want the quotations in there, this.props.text.
And the quotations are not really a syntax there. It's simply because in the UI he wants to show quotes around what the person said.
Exactly. So now if I take a look at what that gives us, all right, it's going to create this load sample data, and are we bundling the right thing? That is a good question. So we are in part 1. That is correct. Right, of course it's not supposed to show anything because we never added it to the app component. So that is actually the next step. So let's go all the way back up to the app component right here, and you see how we have inbox.pane. We actually need to do the same thing for the conversation pane. And that is why it wasn't showing us.
I love the way you left that out just to illustrate that point.
So what you'll notice here is that we need to actually pass something into the conversation pane, and perhaps we want to pass in the conversation pane that was selected, right? So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a function that we're going to pass to the inbox component. This function will be called every time that the inbox, something in one of the inbox items gets clicked, okay? And this is going to set a selected conversation state in our app component that will then be passed down to our conversation pane.
Okay.
So that's one way to handle events. Okay, it's an interesting way. It's a little bit different. You pass basically the event handler down from the component that does contain that state that you might need to pass the events back the other way. But if you think about it, it's still a one-directional way to do it, to pass this data around, okay? Because essentially, even though the event took place in the inbox item, like that's where I clicked the conversation that I want to read, okay? It actually went all the way back to the app component, and that's how it propagated down to the other components, like the conversation pane. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do here. So you'll see the first thing I might want to do is just sort of add that conversation pane, but this is not going to do anything because we don't pass in. So if I just close that a little bit, to speed things up a bit, if I don't pass in the conversations as a prop, like none of this will actually be rendered. It'll just show nothing. So instead, what I want to do is here I'm going to add. I'm actually going to rename this to conversation singular, so I don't confuse myself. Okay. What I'm going to do first is I'm actually going to create this function that's going to handle this event. And before that, I just want to add it to the initial state so that it is there. So selected conversation is going to be basically nothing. Okay. I'm going to create a function that is basically set selected conversation.
Now, do you want selected conversation to be an array?
No, I don't. I just set it as an array, but you can set it to anything else.
Okay.
Consider it just any null value, really.
Okay.
Any empty value. I like just to use the array. So this is the function that's going to set the state. Now, because this piece of the state is passed down through the props, anytime it changes, if you remember our lifecycle methods, all those other components will receive an updated prop, like that updated prop, right? So all this function selected conversation is going to do is going to take this context in this component and set state right in there. And you'll notice here that I'm not setting the entire state object. I'm only setting the piece that changed, in this case, the selected conversation. Okay, and I'm going to set it to this.state.humans, the human index. So basically, what human conversation was selected, and the conversations object in that human object. Okay, so if I do this, I can take this selected conversation object and actually pass it down to the inbox pane. And I'll just name it the same thing. Voila. Okay. And I'm going to pass it again down to the inbox item, where it is actually going to be called anytime that inbox item gets clicked. So I'm going to scroll down here to the inbox pane, pass it down to the inbox item. And now in the inbox item, this is where I'm going to add my event listener. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go create a little set selected function handler, a sort of event handler that's going to basically call this.props.set selected conversation, and it's going to be this.props.index that it was passed already for the inbox item. And then I'm going to make sure that this set selected gets called anytime our first sort of message summary that I'm going to convert into an A tag right here. Okay. Anytime that this anchor is clicked, okay, what I want to do is this.setSelected. All right. So we're missing a comma right here. Excellent. So what we've done here is we've said anytime this TD, this link for the message summary gets selected, what this function will do is it will call the set selected conversation, okay, with the props index, so the name of the human, okay, and this function was passed down from the app, so it will actually go all the way up here and then execute this little piece of code right here, which will set the state of the selected conversation. Now, to actually pass this to the conversation pane, we're going to go into here and add in conversation. This.state.selected conversation. Now, anytime that we click something, it should change the conversation in the conversation pane. So let's take a look.
That's a really interesting pattern that you've actually passed down not data, but you've passed down functionality. You've passed down a function that does something, but because that function was defined at the top, whenever the child that's kind of consuming it calls it, it calls it at the top, right?
Yeah. And then it sets the state at the top, which then gets propagated to the other components.
Okay.
So I don't have to do this in the app. If there was another component that was below app that had this piece that I wanted, then I could do it there. I don't have to do it all the way at the top. But in this case, our app is really simple. So now if I actually run this code, it should work. So if I go back here, I'm going to want to load some sample data. If I click this, in theory, it should show the conversation, which it doesn't. It says that object expected. And if I take a look at what I did here, I go back, and so the inbox.pane is going to pass the set selected conversation to the inbox item. And I notice here that I'm not using the props right there. So now if I save this, Webpack is going to resave. And I go back here. If I load the sample data again, there we go. I'm actually selecting the conversation.
Wonderful.
So there we have it. We were able to pass data from what the event, the on-click event happening here, all the way back up to the app component, and then back down to the conversation to actually change the conversation that's selected.
All right.
In there.
Okay, so we've looked at our first pane, our second pane, and now we're going to look at the next major component in our sample application, which is the stores and ovens. All right, welcome back to React.js. One more piece of this sample application to teach you some concepts about React.js. You've seen the input, I keep calling it the input, it's the inbox. We saw the inbox pane, the conversation pane, and we're going to see the last piece, which is the pizza stores and ovens. And this is this is going to teach us some more concepts in line with using these components. It's nice to see it 3 times because I'm starting to really get the feel for it.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll actually be doing a lot of this over and over again in React. You're creating lots of components.
Yeah.
They all fit into each other, and you're passing data around. So let's get right to it. The first thing that I want to do is perhaps actually modify our sample data here to actually do have the stores component. So what I'm going to do to save us some typing time, I'm just going to take the last, basically the end folder's sample data, go back to part 1, and just rewrite our sample data, just replace it right here. So if I go back now, I have stores as well as humans in my sample data. So what I'm going to do next is actually create that sort of store pane component. So I'm going to scroll all the way down, go to create a new component right here. And of course, I cannot type properly. But here we go. We're going to create that store pane. We're going to want to have a render function right here. And what this render function is going to have is a basic div that has the store pane's ID. Voila. And the next piece will be to perhaps render all the stores that are in our stores object. So to do that, before that, I'm just going to add a little h1 tag at the top that just says stores and ovens, just so we know what's inside here. I'm going to do the same thing that we've been doing in the past with the object keys in this case, because everything is an individual object and it's not an array. So I'm going to go object dot keys. All right, and just to make sure we fix that typo right away. So I'm going to go objects.keys, this.props.stores. So I'm assuming that the stores are being passed through the props functionality. I'm going to map it to another function that renders every store. And now we don't have to necessarily create a different function. We can actually just create a simple arrow function directly in the code. But I prefer to create another function just in case it does get a little bit more complicated in that function right up there. But in this case, it's actually
now you said arrow function, but we couldn't actually write an arrow function right now, right? Because we're in JavaScript. I mean, we're not using ES6 at this point.
Actually, we are.
Oh, we are.
Our Webpack compiler does include the preset for ES 2015.
Oh, interesting.
So it is. You can actually write code right now, but for the sake of what we're doing right now, we're not going to cover any of the ES 2015 stuff.
Okay.
We'll do that in Module 5. But yes, you can write an arrow function because the Webpack's already configured for that.
Awesome.
Awesome. So we've been using the final Webpack config that for the entire project throughout. So it does have all of that, but we don't need to do that right now. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to render the store. This is going to be very similar to the same idea that we had with the inbox message. Okay, so I'm going to give it a key, give it the index itself, some details, and you'll notice that we're using the props to pass this down. Okay, and we're missing something here to actually close the tag. Voila. I'm going to add our store component now. And here we're going to do a little bit different stuff here that's going to be a little bit more interesting. And this is what's going to sort of lead us to our next conversation about prop types. So this store is going to take a couple of data points, right? But they're all going to be essentially counts of something. So what I'm going to do is, in theory, I'm going to do the work in the component right away. But in theory, you could just pass this and have the component validate whether you pass the right data in.
Okay.
Right. But for the sample right here, I'm actually not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to do it directly in the component. Now, you could argue that this is the more proper method because everything that's in that component is being derived directly in that component, so that there's no extra state that's being calculated. All right, and then being passed to another component. But again, it really depends on what your preference is. So of course, all components have a render function. This render function is going to render a li unit, and we're going to add that return right at the top right there. Okay, this li, what it's going to do is it's going to return the name of this store, so props.index. And here's where we could have used that prop type validation. So I'm going to say orders confirmed, and I'm going to take this dot. I'm going to use the get count function. So I'm just going to add that curly brace right there. So I'm going to count how many confirmed orders have been placed to this store, and I'm also going to do the same thing, but for the other statuses. So perhaps in the oven is another one. So this is this different status of in the oven. And delivered is another status that we're interested in. So how many pizzas has this store delivered? I'm actually going to implement this function right here, and all it's going to do is it's going to go into the props.details.orders.filter. So I'm going to use this filter function, pass it in a function that basically all it does is it returns n only if the status is equal to the status that we care about. And then once that's done, I'm going to take the length of that newly filtered array, and I'm going to pass that in. So this is a fairly straightforward component. Now, this won't work until we actually add it into the app. So if we go all the way back up here, we can add it right in there. Whoops, what happened here? Sorry about that. There we go, store pane. And what I'm going to want to do is actually also add in the stores that are being passed in from our state. And now we should be able to see all the stores and the store pane. So if I go back here, there we go. We have our stores at the side right here. If I load some sample data, there's our pizza ovens.
2 ovens with 3 different order counts. Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the prop types. What are prop types? We're going to just show a little diagram on the screen right now.
And where are those?
That's it.
There we go.
Okay. Every single component, when you pass in props, you can actually declare the types of the props. So you can say that this is an array, a boolean, a function, a number, an object, and a string. And you could also pass in what type of object that you're expecting.
Okay.
And that way you can specify that, hey, this prop type has to be a number. So in our case here, when we were creating this store component, what we could have done instead is, instead of having us derive the number of that state, we could have actually created another component for the individual order sentence right here. So if we jump back to our screen, this could have been its own component, okay? And then it would have been passed in the actual value, and then we could have said that it takes a prop type of a number. So it basically
make sure you give me a number, because
exactly.
I have to show it. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something that we could have done here instead.
Wonderful. Okay, well, that covers that concept, and that actually wraps up Module 3. What are we going to cover in Module 4, Remy?
So we're going to be working on React routing. This app right now, you can see that we have a very sort of details and master pane. Okay, so the inbox is the master pane, and the details is the conversation.
Yeah.
Perhaps someone wants to navigate directly to a specific conversation. So what we're going to do is we're going to modify the URL in our next module to actually show the conversation and the person that you were talking to, so that you can navigate directly into it. So that shows us React routing, and we're also going to cover a couple of other things.
Excellent. All right, so stick with us. Hey everybody, welcome back. Still talking about React.js, and now we're going to be looking at routing, which is an important topic anytime you're working with an application that's going to be running in the browser. What is routing, Rami?
Routing is basically this